I'm pleased to introduce Drs. Jodi Holschuh and Sherrie Nist as our speakers for this hour. Jodi comes to us from Texas State University, where she is an assistant professor within the Curriculum and Instruction Department. Sherrie is Professor Emeritus at the University of Georgia, where she directed the Division of Academic Enhancement. Jodi and Sherrie have extensive experience as teachers and authors within the disciplines of reading and academic success. And throughout their careers as instructors and authors, Jodi and Sherrie's zeal for staying abreast of learning theory research has led to effective practices in helping students to identify who they are as learners. And now here they are to speak about their methods and practices.
Good morning. I'm Sherrie Nist-Olejnik, and Jodi will be with you in just a little bit. Today we're going to talk about helping students discover their inner learner, and this is especially with using theory. We want to start by talking why students often enter college with negative views about learning. Here we go. All right, there we go. Helping students discover their inner learner. So first we want to talk about why students enter college with negative views on learning, or perhaps develop these negative views early on. Students oftentimes feel like going to college is a have to, not a want to. It's very much, they feel the very same way they felt when they were in high school, so they had to go to high school. And they often feel like going to college is a have to as well. They are maybe pressured from their family to go to college, or they just don't know what else they have to do. Oftentimes also, students become overwhelmed by college tasks very early on. Many students in high school aren't very challenged, and teachers directed everything they did by giving them study guides and so forth. And once they find out that learning is more independent in college, they oftentimes don't have the tools to deal with that. The other two things that Jodi and I have found why students become negative about learning in college is that they have a lack of understanding about their role in the learning process. They don't know where they fit in. They're used to teachers directing their learning, not them directing it themselves. And coupled with that is their lack of knowledge about themselves as learners. If you talk to a brand new college freshman, most of them won't have any idea at all about themselves as learners, their beliefs about learning, their learning orientations, anything about their own characteristics as a learner. So these things sort of interfere with students being successful in college. So what do we think? In our experience, we say, well, theory to the rescue. This is the T word, but we believe that if students can understand themselves as learners, that they can accomplish this through theory. Why should we teach theory? Well, we have three main reasons that we believe dictate that we should teach theory in the classroom. The first reason is that learning is complex, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, about how complex learning is and how students believe that learning should be easy and not difficult, that learning is simple, when in fact it is very complex, and students are not taught about the complexity of learning anywhere, most of them in their high school kind of careers. The second reason for teaching theory is that beliefs about learning influence how students study. We're going to talk a little bit about epistemological beliefs, that is, what students believe learning is. And we found that students come in with very, very naive beliefs about what learning actually is. They may believe that learning is very simple rather than complex. They may believe that someone else is in charge of their learning. And so that all influences how students are going to study. And third, we believe that we need to teach theory because students' the learning orientations affect students' persistence and motivation. So whether students have a mastery approach, or performance approach, or performance avoidance approach, this is going to influence how they learn and their persistence and motivation. So let's start with the complexity of learning. Just why is learning so complex? And we're going to look at this by examining a little bit of learning theory. Throughout my career, and Jodi's as well, we have used this tetrahedral model of learning to kind of frame our instruction. All of our books are organized around these 4 factors in the tetrahedral model. So you can see that it has the characteristics of the learner. It includes the text, the task, and all 3 of those factors go into so that students can select the correct strategies. If you think of the student as being in the center of this pyramid, then all of these 4 factors have to come together in order for learning to be maximized. And I just wanted to add, you see by the site at the bottom of the slide that this theory is not anything new. This theory was developed actually by Jenkins in the late 1970s and adapted by Bransford during the whole cognitive revolution that happened in the late 1970s. So this is nothing new, and in Jodi and my teaching we have tried other theories to sort of think about how we can maximize learning with students, and we always come back to the tetrahedral model. So let's kind of pull it apart a little bit now and look at the 4 different factors that go into influence learning. First of all, there's the characteristics that the learner brings to the situation, to the learning situation. All of these characteristics are unique to every student. No 2 students bring the same characteristics to the learning table. So it includes their attitudes about learning, their motivation, how motivated they are to learn something, certainly their prior knowledge and their educational experiences in any kind of a course in history or science or whatever. Every student brings different kinds of prior knowledge, and they need to be able to recognize what that is in order to select the right strategies and so forth. It includes their belief about what knowledge is and what learning is, and Jodi's going to talk about this in a little bit. It also includes whether they have certain learning disabilities or physical disabilities that affect their learning and how they have to work around those disabilities and strengthen those abilities. It also includes how they manage their time and certainly their metacognitive ability. So all of this has to do with the uniqueness of each learner. The second factor in the tetrahedral model, of course, is the text. And when we talk about text, we're not just talking about textbooks, although this is a large portion of how the text that students interact with in college. So it includes their lecture notes, videos, supplements, lab information, hypertext, films, any kind of material that students are responsible for learning is considered text. And also it includes whether students can understand and make sense of considerate and inconsiderate text. As most of you are probably familiar with, inconsiderate text has to do with text that could be poorly organized, very dense, and students have very, very much difficulty in getting at the text. And oftentimes it's not their fault. It's just that the text is not very considerate to them at all. So are they able to reorganize the text and pull it apart to make sense of it? So those text then is a very broad term here. The third factor that of the model, tetrahedral model, is task. And task is defined as any activity that indicates the mastery of the text or texts that students are dealing with. So a task can be an exam, it can be a paper, it can be a lab, it can be individual or group projects or speech or homework, anything that the professor asks students to do. So students need to know what the task is. But that's only part of it. It's not enough for students to be able to say, well, the task is I have a 50-item multiple choice test. Also included, and maybe more important in task, is the level of thinking that's required. So if a student had a 50-item multiple choice test, he or she should be able to say, well, I know from past experience or from looking at old tests or from what the professor has said about task in class that basically I'm going to have to memorize, or I have to do an essay exam, and I know I'm going to have to synthesize and analyze. So if students don't have both of those pieces, what the activity actually is and the level of thinking required, they're going to have trouble putting that together. And then, going to the final factor, selecting the correct strategies in order for them to master the task. in order for students to select the correct learning strategies to use, they have to be able to know themselves as a learner. They have to know something about their text. They have to understand the task. And only then can they select the correct learning strategies or the appropriate learning strategies for the task. We define learning strategies as activities that the students engage in order to master the text for the task. These strategies are student-controlled strategies. They're not something that a professor gives them or a teacher gives them. You know, many students are used to getting things like study guides from their high school teachers, and all they would have to do would be to memorize the answers to the study on the study guide, and they would do fine on the test. But these are strategies, when we talk about learning strategies, they're student-created strategies that they have control over. And these strategies can take either a deep or surface approach to learning, depending on what the task is. So if my task, again, is this 50-item multiple choice test where I have to memorize, I'm going to use a more surface approach to learning. I might use a series of note cards, concept cards to learn, versus if I'm going to have to write an essay exam, or if I'm going to have multiple choice questions that take a deep approach that require analysis and synthesis, I'm going to have to select strategies, perhaps like the question-answer strategy that invites students to know the how and the why of how something works rather than just the what. And in terms of learning strategies, we feel that effective learning strategies have several characteristics. They're flexible in that students can take those strategies and they can modify them to make them their own. And in the same vein, they're generative. In that students come up with the strategies to use. They're not dictated by someone else. They help students to reduce information, boil it down, boil it down. And most of what research says is that in the bottom line, that students are responsible for about 30% of what they read and hear and interact with. So they have to be able to reduce that information down to the 30% that's most important. Effective learning strategies also help students organize information or reorganize information, perhaps through maps and charts, flow charts and so forth, even on concept cards that students can organize information. Effective learning strategies help students to elaborate. And again, this elaboration is personalization. So when they're thinking about examples and so forth, they can personalize these examples to help them remember it better. And probably most important is that the effective learning strategies have a self-testing component that actually helps them develop metacognition. So the self-testing component, you know, most of the time when students study, they read over material, and that's not self-testing. So how can they blindly test what they're doing? So for example, again, with concept cards, if they have a term and some other information on the front, and then the examples and definitions and so forth on the back, they can't see the information. So it's a blind testing component. They can flip the card over and tell whether they're correct or not. And certainly it's important for students to develop metacognition. When they go into an exam, students should be able to know what they know very well and what they don't know. And they should be able to articulate that very clearly. So these four components all come together to maximize learning, and students really need to be made aware of these four different components if they're to be effective learners. Now, Jodi's going to talk to you now about the next part of the theory that we're going to talk about, beliefs about learning. Jodi?
Good morning. So happy to be here. So one of the first things that we do with students is teach them about the tetrahedral model, and then we sort of pull it apart, because we found that to get students to really buy into changing the way they learn, they need to understand what it is they're doing now and what might be not so effective in what they're doing. So one of the theories we found resonates most with students is the theory of epistemological beliefs. Now, when we put this theory in our books, we call it beliefs about knowledge, but I think students can probably handle the word epistemology. So we're going to talk about a little bit about this theory today, and this was developed by Marlene Schomer in the 1990s, and she and others have been developing it for years. Epistemological beliefs are students' individual assessment about what knowledge is and where knowledge comes from. Marlene Schomer describes it as a series of 5 factors. So I'm just going to walk you quickly through those 5. You might want to think about them as a continuum. So people on the left-hand side of the continuum, we would call naive knowers. And people on the right-hand side of the continuum, according to the theory, are considered mature knowers. Now I have a little bit of a problem with those terms, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about factor 1. A student who held a deep belief that knowledge was certain would believe that knowledge consists of facts, truth with a capital T, an answer to every question. Other people hold a belief on the opposite end of the continuum. They believe that knowledge is continually changing, there are no facts. In fact, there was a professor at the University of Georgia, a philosophy professor, who would start out every class saying, there is no truth, there are no facts. And students would debate that for the rest of the semester. And frankly, for freshmen, that would blow their minds because all through high school, knowledge equals facts. End-of-year tests tended to test on facts. So many of our students come into college with a very strong belief that knowledge is certain. Coupled with that, many students believe that knowledge is simple. So a student holding a belief in simple knowledge would think that knowledge consists of isolated bits of information. Contrast that with someone on the opposite end of the continuum who believes that knowledge is highly integrated and everything is connected to everything else. So let's say we had a student who believed that knowledge was simple. Knowledge was isolated bits of information. They would seek to keep every little fact, every little bit of information separate in their minds. And so when we as instructors say pull things together, make sure that you can pull ideas together, they don't know what we're talking about. So back when Sherrie was talking about the tetrahedral model, she said that students need to use their learner characteristics, the test, and the task to pull out the correct learning strategy to use. So let's say we had a student who believed that knowledge was certain, knowledge equals facts, and knowledge is simple. Knowledge equals isolated bits of information. What kind of study strategy might they use? Well, you see them walking around campus with them all the time. Flashcards, right? It would be a perfect match with their beliefs. So on the front of the card, they would have one fact, and on the back of the card, they would have some definition. They could flip through them, and by the time they've memorized these cards, according to their belief about knowledge, and remember, the word belief is not just this one-off. A belief is an inner core gut feeling. So according to their belief about knowledge, when they've memorized those cards, they've achieved knowledge. If they go into a class where the professor thinks the task is to synthesize ideas that flow together, not only is that student not prepared, they have no idea where those questions came from because according to their belief about knowledge, they've achieved it. That's why I think it's so important to teach students about this. So the third factor is a belief in who holds the knowledge, omniscient authority. So some students believe that knowledge is external. So the person responsible for their learning would be someone outside of themselves, a teacher, a parent, a textbook. Someone other than them is in charge of learning. Other students hold a belief that knowledge is internal, and they largely construct the knowledge on their own. Now let's say we had a student who held a belief that knowledge was external. If they didn't do well on an exam, who might they blame? Well, they might blame the professor. He didn't teach well enough. They might blame their roommate who made too much noise. They couldn't study. Anyone outside themselves. The thing about omniscient authority, though, is that those same students, if they do well on an exam, tend to blame sources or tend to credit sources outside themselves as well. So I was lucky. I had a good professor. Thank goodness my roommate was out when I had to study. Again, it's something outside themselves. And if you can't even take credit for your successes, it's really hard to maintain motivation for learning. Now, I said before that I don't like the terms naive and mature, and let me just talk about that for a minute. Let's say that we had a student who is sort of developing epistemologically, and these beliefs do develop just sort of naturally as we go through college and we go through life. So when you hear the terms naive and mature, it seems like we want everybody to get to mature, right? Because no one wants to be naive. But let's say we had a person who believed there were no facts, none at all. everything was connected to everything else, and you were responsible. That person was responsible for constructing all that knowledge. So all on that mature side of the continuum. If we really had individuals who thought that way about everything, they never would be able to make a decision. You'd never be able to move forward. So most people fall somewhere in the middle, somewhere in between in the continuum. And a lot of the current research is on whether or not epistemological beliefs depend upon domain, and I tend to think it does. For some things, we probably hold very mature epistemological beliefs. For others, not so much, depending on our background. The fourth factor is how fast students think learning should occur. Many of our students come to college thinking learning should happen fast or it's not going to happen at all, whereas people on the other end of the continuum believe that knowledge is a gradual process and that learning takes time. Now, a lot of students come to college with the belief that knowledge should be fast, that learning should be quick, based upon their previous educational experiences. Before they get to college, many students find that fast is good, right? You have speed math tests starting from first grade. Even in high school, most math problems that students encounter, they're able to solve in under 2 minutes. So students have this arbitrary idea of how long a task should take. When they hit a 2-minute marker in college pre-calc and they're not done with the test, or they're not done with the question, they get quickly frustrated. But they hold those same beliefs for how long it should take to write a paper, how long it should take to read a textbook chapter, how long it should do just about any academic task they encountered before college. Now, I say this is largely arbitrary. It is based upon previous experience, but the task of learning has changed. And one of the things that I try to do with students is help them recognize that early. So I said earlier that epistemological beliefs develop naturally just by being in college. So one question that we had was, well, can we get students to develop them faster? What if we took some brand new freshmen and we taught them about epistemological beliefs and we gave them an assessment so they knew where they stood? Would they make some changes earlier? It looks encouraging that they do, especially on this quick learning factor. It's almost as if by knowing that learning should take time and that's okay, it's like we give them permission to take the time to learn. One student in the interviews from the research said to me, I hear your voice in my head just saying, just give it 5 more minutes, just give it 5 more minutes. The last factor is innate ability. Some people believe that the ability to learn is fixed. Other people believe that learning is changeable and that the ability to learn can be developed. And again, most people hold a belief somewhere in the middle. So some people think that this shouldn't even be part of the theory at all because they say, well, you know, there are geniuses, there are people who are just good at some things. But we strongly believe that students should know about this because we don't often hear about what students can do. Students often tell us about what they can't do, right? So I'm English-brained, I'm not math-brained, or science-brained, don't give me history. They tend to use this innate ability notion to cut themselves off from learning. I know that when I started college, I had a really strong belief that I would never be able to do math of any kind ever. Probably in 18 years of age, I wasn't ready to hear that I could do it. Some of it is, you know, tied up in identity issues and all that. But I think that students do need to know that their abilities are changeable. And that's one of the most powerful things, I think, of this particular model, is that it opens students up to the possibility that, well, you know what, it's not all set for me yet. We have some suggestions to help students become more epistemologically mature a little bit faster. First, we like to assess students' epistemological beliefs and share that data with students. We include an assessment in each of our textbooks on epistemological beliefs. It's in the Beliefs About Knowledge chapter, and we'd be happy to share it with you as well. I think it's important to share that data with students as a snapshot in time. This is where you are right now in response to this. We do know that epistemological beliefs change and probably depend upon the situation in which you're responding to. We also ask students to define content. So in other words, if I was teaching a science class, I would ask students, what is science? Tell me what your belief is about science. If I was teaching a history class, what is history? If students told me history is this memorizing dates and facts, that would tell me volumes about their beliefs about history. In my own classes, I ask students to define learning and to define reading. Boy, that gives them trouble, right? We all know what reading is, but it's pretty hard to define. We use this data for the rest of the semester. So they define the content in the beginning of the semester, and we ask them to use it for the rest. We use it as our information for the rest of our conversations for the whole semester. A good way for students to develop a more mature belief in simple knowledge and certain knowledge is to give students a piece of text with the conclusion missing and have students write their own conclusion and discuss all possible solutions. And this is one way that they can see that there's more than one way to solve a problem. And it's a start for many students to start to see, oh, wait, there is no one right answer. It's more complex than that. And finally, discuss your own learning experiences to show the seams of learning. When they look up at professors, they think, oh, you guys just know it all. You were naturally smart. Well, most of us teaching in developmental education have struggled at some point with learning. And I think talking about that with students can really help them buy into learning strategies and making some changes in the way they approach learning. Now, this may be obvious to us, but it's also important to talk directly to students about the importance of sequence and concept building. If they're taking a math course and they don't understand the concepts in Chapter 2, oh boy, are they going to be in trouble by Chapter 7. Seems obvious to us, but for some reason, many students don't even think about that. So we love to talk about epistemological beliefs, and another theory that we really like to talk about is a student's approaches to learning. Their learning and orientation, and this is also part of that learner characteristic. How they approach learning really does make a difference. Now, why does it make a difference? Well, let me talk a little bit about some research that Carol Dweck did. She did this research with 5th graders, and she looked at 5th graders solving puzzles. Half the students were praised for being smart, half the students were praised for working hard. After they solved the first puzzle, they were given an opportunity to do a second puzzle. They could either choose one that was at the same level or one that was harder. And the results show that students who were praised for working hard tended to pick the harder puzzle because they wanted to show they could keep working hard. But here's the real kicker. Students who were praised for being smart tended to pick a puzzle that was at that same level of difficulty. And the research showed that that was because they didn't want to look not smart. So they wanted to preserve that image of themselves as smart. So what does that mean for us as instructors? Well, it means that students are going to come to us with different orientations toward learning. Some are going to take a mastery approach to learning. Those are the students who are highly focused on learning. They see mistakes as learning opportunities. They tend to read for understanding. This approach to learning is highly related to academic success. Some students will achieve it in some courses. Almost no one achieves it in all courses. Some students will take a performance approach to learning, and we see this quite often. These are also high achievers, but these students like recognition for their efforts. They're the ones who like the trophies and the awards. They're very competitive for grades. They want to prove that they're capable. They earn high grades, they work hard, but they often have high stress or anxiety and tend to burn out or be in danger of burning out. They're the ones we often call the grade brothers. Then we have the last one, which is called performance avoid, which Sherrie and I both agree is a very awkward term, but that's the one the theory uses. These are the students who are afraid of looking dumb. They tend to give up on tasks quickly. They tend not to seek help. They tend to wait until the last minute to do any work. These are the ones who are often procrastinators, and they see mistakes as a sign of a lack of intelligence. So they're less focused on learning and more focused on preserving their self-image. So often these are the people that we call bright but lazy, capable but not looking. Often are the ones who take this performance avoid approach. So we think that the secret to finding the learner inside is to understand that most of a person's attitude toward learning is tied to perception. So small shifts in perception can lead to big changes in attitude. We're not asking to change them entirely. It's a matter of seeing things a little bit differently. And many students have said to me, it's like flipping a switch. I didn't see it, and then I did. To maximize learning, students need to consider all the parts of the tetrahedral model and recognize the need to use all of their senses in learning. Some of them come to us saying, oh, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, whatever. We think the more senses they can engage in their learning, the better. So they read about it, they write about it, they talk about it. They're going to learn much more than using any one modality alone. And we think it's important to know, for students to know, that learning equals change, and change is often good. So now we want to open it up to questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Jodi and Sherrie. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, reading off the list here. First question. I think I'm saying this. I think I wrote it down correctly. What activities have had the most success in getting students to think critically about who they are as learners? So, I guess the person's asking, Amy's asking, if there's anything you could point to specifically.
Well, we tend to. Sherrie, I'll take it.
Okay.
If you have anything else. We tend to use a combination of class discussion and self-reflection. So I think it's a really good idea to have students read something before they come to class, which is why we put so many chapters in our books about learning theory, so that they have some background to build on, and then reflect in some way. So usually we give them some kind of a journal prompt. I love scenarios. So like for the mastery or for the learning orientation approach, I might say, you just passed a test in a class that you found really difficult. Talk about, your approach to that performance and see what they talk about. It's a good jumping off point for discussion.
I would just like to emphasize the idea about scenarios. We've always believed that scenarios are just very, very powerful ways to get students to sort of see themselves in other learners. We have scenarios in our book about different kinds of learning problems that students have. And most of the time, if students can see themselves in somebody else, it's a lot easier for them to accept that they need to maybe make some minor changes. So I really believe and agree with Jodi that scenarios are very powerful.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to look at the next question that came in from Sam. Do you apply these learning strategies to actual reading skills? And Sam goes on to give the example, like identifying major supporting details.
I'll start out, and Jodi, maybe you can chime in on this. We talk about trying to teach reading strategies and studying strategies rather than skills. So, for example, we would go about teaching main idea. Let's say we use real pieces of college text, and we would go about teaching main idea by teaching students how to annotate that text. How do you reduce the information? How do you pull out key ideas and write that in the margins of the text? How do you pull out examples? And so this, in addition, gives students the chance to use more of their senses to learn. So they're just not reading it, they're reading it, being able to pull out the key ideas, write those down in the margins of their text, and then say them to themselves. And so we teach strategies, basic kind of reading and studying strategies, but we do it through realistic kinds of pieces of text. Jodi, you want to add anything to that?
Well, and I would say that we sort of weave this into everything we do. So although the reading skills are really important, Sherrie always says, and I love this, no one ever majored in the idea. And so getting them to go beyond building blocks of reading and moving on to the skills that are going to last them a lifetime is super important to us. And we think that understanding themselves as a learner, getting that spark back to want to learn, is a key to learning anything.
And I think the difference, too, when we talk about reading skills, we talk about things like main idea and inference and so forth. We like to look at that from more of a strategic approach rather than just, today we're going to talk about main idea. So it's in a bigger context.
Very cool. Okay. Next question looks like it came in from Audrey. I'm very interested in the performance avoid learner. Where can I find research, examples, etc., of how to help this type of learner? Is there evidence that performance avoid can be reversed or changed? And if so, at what age levels?
You want me to go, Sherrie?
Yeah, go ahead, Jodi.
Okay. So this research was started by Carol Dweck in the late 1980s, and people are still very interested in it. Pinterest did a lot of work in it. There's just tons of stuff out there on learning orientation. And can they make a change? Well, you know, research is mixed on that. I have to believe, to do my job, that students can make a change. I have to believe that. And so when I talk to students about a performance avoid approach, do you want to be that guy? Do you want to be the person who's smart but doesn't apply yourself? Do you want to be the person who shies away from it? Having students reflect on how they came to be the learner that they are. I do a little learning autobiography reflective activity with them. And I talk about, you know, what are your strengths in learning? What do you think led to those strengths? What are your weaknesses in learning? What do you think led to those weaknesses? And a lot of times students can actually point to, well, in 4th grade, I realized I wasn't the smartest one in the room, and I just kind of gave up. So I think a lot of times that reflection and thinking through where they want to be can help students with the change. We've seen lots of students blossom in college who might not have been successful before they got there.
And I think, too, that sometimes you don't even realize the effect you're having on students by pushing them and trying to make them understand themselves as learners and trying to make them understand that, hey, you know, you're smart and lazy. I remember Brian, a student that I had, and it was just like pulling teeth to get him to do anything. But he did it, and I don't know whether he did it because, you know, he didn't want me to feel ill of him or whatever, but years after I taught Brian, he would come back, and when he was in Athens, and stop in my office and see me, and he just would smile and say, you know, I still hear your voice. I still hear your voice that you believed in me. And, you know, you were one of the first people that did. So I think oftentimes we don't even know the effect that we're going to have on students down the line by trying to give them some confidence in themselves and make them into non-lazy learners.
Okay. This next question from John, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Sherrie, that you had mentioned concept cards, and then Jodi later on mentioned flashcards. Are these different study tools? And if so, what are the differences, I guess, between a concept card and a flashcard?
Good question. Yeah, I'll take it. So flashcards are what you see students generally use. We like students to use what we call a concept card, and it just adds really a couple of things to your basic flashcard. So a flashcard is word on the front, definition on the back. A concept card would not only have a word on the front, but whatever the larger concept is. So let's say students were studying memory. They might have short-term memory on the front of their card, and then in the upper right-hand corner, they would put memory processes. So when they were studying those, they could put them to back, or they could group them by larger concepts. So instead of just learning the card short-term memory, they could put short-term memory, sensory store, and long-term memory all together. They can even lay them out on the table like a map to see how the concepts are related. We also like on the back of the card, instead of just having a definition, they have some kind of example so that they can put this definition into some kind of context. And so it's just, we also, by the way, make a big point of putting a page number on their card, so if they have a question to it, they can go back to it. just a couple of tiny changes makes a world of difference in the way that they can use these as a tool for study.
And for students, if students really learn how to do concept cards rather than flashcards, they can be used for higher level thinking tasks as well as memory level tasks. And so, and it's an idea that students are familiar with to start with. Most students have used flashcards to learn vocabulary words or language terms and so forth. And so it's something that they actually have some information about, and they just have to expand on it a little bit more to make them more useful.
Okay. Very cool. The next question, I think it might be the last, but we will get to everyone. We'll get you an answer regardless, is from Karen. And do you approach different kinds of learners differently, particularly the avoider, or do you expect all students to kind of self-correct through the strategies you use and class discussions and scenarios?
I tend to model what I want to see, and I'm kind of a stickler for some things. So one thing that I found with the performance avoider is that if I grade the very first assignment the way I would really grade it, so in other words, if it's a 2 out of 10, they get a 2 out of 10 with a chance to revise. Not only a chance, they have to revise. That sets them up for the behavior that I want to see. In other words, that I don't really care when they get it, I care that they get it. And I model that through the semester. If they get a grade that they don't like, they can turn it back in up until about the midpoint of the semester and get some credit back. Again, I don't care when they get it, I care that they get it. And it addresses not only that performance avoider, but also that quick learning. Wait a minute, slow down, let's really think this through. This is important. I want you to Sherrie, anything?
No, that's good.
All right. Well, Jodi, Sherrie, thank you very much. Everyone in the audience, thank you very much. And like I said, the remaining questions, we do have several left, quite a few left. We will get those answers to you directly. And then just one last bit of housekeeping. This session, so the PowerPoint slides, the discussions, everything, this is all being recorded. So expect to find the archive, the files available from the Speaking About Developmental English website where you registered. So they'll be there for your review to have and to reference later on. So again, Jodi, Sherrie, thank you very much, and to all of you in the audience, have a very pleasant day.